I want to thank the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and particularly Kelly for inviting me today. You know, it's interesting that we have Yellow Jackets kind of ruling the world everywhere. We have the CEO of Walmart is a Yellow Jacket, and the head of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation is a Yellow Jacket. So we may just want to turn this into a Georgia Tech Appreciation Day. Since we can't really brag about our football team any longer. I noticed we're playing Georgia tonight in basketball, and I'm not even going to go watch. So, so we got to brag about something. But I do, again, thank the Public Policy Foundation for being a voice of reason at times when we as lawmakers can get off track quite easily. I have found that when you have what can be described as crisis situations, people come up with some crazy ideas. And usually those crazy ideas involve some form of government involvement into our lives. And I would be proud to say, and I think history will bear me out, that when that occurs, the result is usually not very good. So we thank the Public Policy Foundation for being there for us and bringing us back to where we ought to be, and that is standing on the simple issue of freedom. Now, my speech today, I won't do too long. I could probably talk about this in many ways, and I actually wrote down notes, which I typically don't do when I'm speaking, so that I stay channeled on a few major items. But I do want to open it up for questions after that, because when I begin talking about education, which is the policy for which I have the most passion, I tend to get off in many different areas. I would rather get off in those areas based on the questions you ask me, as opposed to my inability to stay on a linear thought process. So I will state this from the very beginning. If everyone leaves here today and no one is offended or no one is called to action, then I probably haven't done my job. So I will tell you that some of the things I'm going to say today are rather bold. I will say these in any community, any environment, simply because I made up my mind a few years ago. This issue is simply too important for us to remain quiet any longer. We cannot continue to nibble around the edges when you consider the problems that we are facing. And I want to kind of describe those, but I want to start on a good note. I can say unequivocally the United States is the greatest nation on earth today and the greatest nation that God ever created. American exceptionalism is a reality. I know my friend from Florida, the new U.S. Senator, talks about it and it offends people, and I hope he goes on offending. Because I believe we were divinely inspired as a nation and put here to do many good things, for which we've done. We should never hold our head down in embarrassment for the United States. Do we get it right every time? Absolutely not. But when you consider that we live in a nation that has given more treasure and more human lives to the purpose of freeing other people around the globe, there is no shame in that. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. We have the opportunity to continue to be the greatest power that the earth has ever known, and a cause for what is good and what is right. We have been given, as individual Americans, one simple requirement. And you probably heard your parents talk about this when you were young, and I talk about it to my children, hopefully you talk about it to your children, and that is, as Americans, we have that one simple responsibility, and that is to take this incredible treasure we've been given, known as the United States of America, and leave it better off than we found it. I'm here to tell you today, friends, that we stand on the brink of failure in doing so. I don't think anyone in this room can honestly say that we are handing off this country in better shape than what we found it. And that is our responsibility, and that is our failure. And we are called to action to change that, and change that immediately. I want to read some stats to you, and if this doesn't shock you, I'm not sure anything else I say today will. 27th in math, 22nd in science, and dead last 32nd in reading. These are the literary scale rankings for the United States among the 32 top industrialized nations around the world, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in their 2009 report. 32 nations. We're 27th in math, 22nd in science, dead last in reading. Now, I'm not exactly sure how we remain a superpower with those numbers. I'm not exactly sure how we remain the nation that the rest of the world wants to immigrate to because of freedom, when we will become simply economic slaves to our debt holders. $13.8 trillion of debt is not going to be erased away when we are near the bottom of the world in those things that prepare our children for a global economy. This economy will crumble under debt, under the weight of debt, but that debt is going to be accumulated because we simply cannot compete on a worldwide marketplace in the next generation if we don't prepare our children to do so. These numbers are inexcusable, and frankly, they're an embarrassment. And for us to simply stand here and pat ourselves in the back and point to a single education facility that may be doing a halfway decent job, or at least in our minds we think they are, and say, well, we're doing okay. We're not doing okay. We're not even close to doing okay. And if this country and this country's future matters to you, if you believe, as I do, that we have that one single responsibility to leave this for our children better than we found it, then we have to admit we're failing. And until we admit we're failing, we're not going to solve the problem. According to the National Assessment of Economic Progress, 1/3 of American fourth graders and 1/4 of eighth graders are functionally illiterate. The wealthiest nation on earth, depending on what measure you look at, we rank between first and fourth in the amount of money we spend per child, and 1/3 of fourth graders are functionally illiterate. There's absolutely no excuse for this. According to the United States Department of Education, K through 12 public education spending was $221 billion in 1993. It is $489 billion in 2007. That is more than double in 15 years. We have invested a lot of money to try to solve this. Again, I bring us back to probably the two figures that trouble me the most and show me where we're headed. $13.8 trillion in debt, trying to now compete in a global economy where technology is king. Yet as of 2004, the United States was producing 70,000 engineers per year. China graduated 600,000 and India graduated 400,000. We're not even sending our kids in the direction we're supposed to send them if we're going to compete. Now, why is this the case? Why is there this massive failure on the part of the most powerful nation on earth? I would submit to you we now have an education system that is not too far removed from the one that was created in the 1920s, that was designed specifically for the purpose of taking children at a very young age, giving them an education to put them into a factory setting. That is what it was created to do. And think about how we do this. Now, if all of us sat around in this room today, and we said over the next hour we're going to design an education system that best fits our desires for America to maintain its superiority on earth, would we come up with a system where we say, well, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take all these kids, and by their mailing address, by their postal address, we're going to determine what brick and mortar school they go to. And then when they get there, we're going to take everybody of the same age, and we're going to put them in a room, and then we're going to tell this poor teacher that it doesn't matter where these kids are starting from. You got to take them from this point to this point over the next 180 days exactly, and this many hours per day. And that is what you're charged to do. No one in their right mind would ever design a system like that in the economy that we live in today and the demands that the global economy is putting on the United States and the children we're supposed to be graduating. Yet that is exactly what we do in 2010. How can this be possible? How can we believe that all kids are... I assume most people in here are parents. I have 4 myself. There are 4 dramatically different children with dramatically different learning needs, even amongst my kids, coming from the same parents, same socioeconomic, obviously the same socioeconomic background. But now take kids who in one class, you have a child who goes home to a mother and a father, and the mother's there waiting on the child to help them with their homework. And in that same class, you have a child who goes home and will have to take his dinner out of the freezer because his mom is at her second job that day. And tell me that in that class, that teacher is supposed to take both of those children from point A to point B using the same curriculum, the same time limits, and the same tools. How can we possibly expect that out of our teachers? Yet that is exactly the demands we're putting on our teachers today, and we get mad when they don't do that. Well, we've got to give them a different set of tools. And the tools need to recognize that all of these children can learn, first of all. I reject this notion that we set aside a certain group of people and we say they can't learn, whether it be for socioeconomic factors, racial factors, family backgrounds. I reject that notion wholeheartedly. Every one of these children can learn if given the proper opportunity and put in the proper setting and demanded that they reach a certain level of academic achievement. And perhaps that is one of our greatest failures, is that we as a society fail to demand out of children what we ought to expect out of them. I'm as guilty as anybody. I commented to my wife the other day, I said, you know, I was at an education summit with Governor Bush and Governor Wise, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and I said, you know, I feel bad because I called home tonight, and the first thing I asked was, how did Emma do in her basketball game? Now, as somebody who probably played basketball from the age of 6 to the age of 25 every day of my life, and always beat my brother. Just kidding. He was pretty good. It's important to me about how my daughter does in basketball. But the fact that I would call up and ask my wife, you know, how did she do in basketball today as opposed to how she do on her math test, is something that I failed to even recognize in my own family of the proper importance of education. We want our kids to do well in sports. I want my son to, I mean, I get so excited about his football games on Saturday, and then when my wife shows me his grades, and particularly with my 7-year-old, because he actually does very well, you know, they're all A's, and I just kind of look at it and set it aside, and I don't honestly even go to him and say, congratulations, you made all A's again. Now, if he wins his football game on Saturday, I'm like, you're doing great. You picked the restaurant today. We're going to go out to where you want to go. And so as a parent, even I have failed in this. And I, you know, sometimes you have to go to these conferences to get re-energized and get back on priorities. But I guess the point is that all kids are different. All kids can learn if given the opportunity. Now, that is where technology comes into play. But I think it's a different mindset than just technology, which I'll talk about in just a second. You know, this is the year, somebody who once recently said this is the year of the of kind of the education documentary. There's been 3 big ones that have come out this year, and I urge you to go see all of them. There's The Lottery, The Cartel, and of course Waiting for Superman. And one of the organizations that's featured in these documentaries is an organization out of New York called Harlem Success Academy. If you haven't seen that, you need to. A gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Canada runs that. And I want you to think about the task that he undertook and the results he's been able to achieve. He went into Harlem and he said, I want the worst section of this city's schools. Give me the worst. These are areas where I think he said 30 to 40% of the kids have a father that's incarcerated. Graduation rate is well below 50%. Most kids go home, again, to that frozen dinner and a mother who's not there because she's working to help out the child. And, it's just not what you would use as an example of American exceptionalism. This is by any definition failure. He said, I want this area. And so he draws his kids from that area. And remember that in their process, you come to his school through a lottery. He doesn't get to go out and cherry pick. I want this kid over here because I know he's got 2 parents at home. I want this kid because he had A's in 2nd grade. No, it's a lottery. And so he has this lottery system, so he brings in those kids from that same socioeconomic background. All the problems that affect the rest of the kids affect these kids. And what's happening? Well, I think it's a 99% graduation rate. And all the kids that graduate go to college. Same pool of children. Same amount of money, by the way. Dramatically different results. And how does he do it? Well, he changed the way that he looks at education. He doesn't look at a child and say, you know, this kid's got a father in jail, a mother with an 8th grade dropout education, living on food stamps. That kid's just not going to make it. He will not accept that. He demands that every kid can learn. And guess what? They all learn. It can happen. I had the opportunity to hear Governor Christie speak last week, and I have to say I was very impressed. But he tells a story of going to, you know, in New York, when they have all these lotteries to get into the charter schools, and everybody wants to, and there's literally hundreds, in some cases thousands of parents on the waiting list to try to get into these schools. And he tells the story of seeing a mother whose son is trying to get into one of the charter schools in New York City for kindergarten. This is a 5-year-old kid we're talking about. And he asked the mother, he said, what does this lottery mean to you today? And this is the mother's impression. Now, I can't say if this is reality, but in her world, it is reality. And she said, the lottery today is the difference between my kid going to college and my kid going to jail. That is a mother whose greatest concern and greatest love in life is this child. She is at a place begging for the opportunity to get a lottery into a charter school because in her mind she believes if she doesn't get it, her kid's going to jail, and if she does get it, her kid will probably be the first person in that family to ever go to college. Now again, I don't know if that's reality, and certainly that kid's destination is not set in stone, but in her mind, that's what that's all about. So how do we as a nation take what we have, which by any measure is not too good, and it's not a function of bad teachers, folks. There are a lot of really, really good teachers out there, and I'm going to take a little aside here. I want you to think about the way we compensate teachers today. As the son of a retired public school teacher who used to complain to me about this all the time, you go into any school here in this state or anywhere in the country, it doesn't matter. You will find good teachers and you'll find bad teachers. And you can go in any profession and find good people and bad people. But it seems to be an education where we say, well, you got a teacher whose students are failing every year, and you got a teacher who's doing incredible things in the classroom, and I figure we'll just pay them the same. Now, how does that make sense? But that's the system that we have. And somebody asked me, Renee asked me at the table, what are some of the underlying things we can do? I said, one thing we need is competition among schools, students, and teachers, so that the good teachers, I don't know if you could properly quantify how much a good teacher ought to be paid. If you think about what is the cost to society, just merely from tax revenue, if a kid drops out of high school, and of course the likelihood that that child is going to go to jail and be incarcerated is going to cost us $50,000 a year. Once they're in jail, not to mention all the cost of prosecuting them, putting them in prison, and the cost of crime and everything associated with that individual. But if you can imagine what a good teacher, the financial impact that they make on a child's life, we ought to be paying them enormous amounts. But in doing so, we have to be willing to say that the bad teacher has to go. That the teacher that's not cutting it has to go. We can't protect you any longer. Our children's future is simply too important to protect you because we think you deserve a job. Because at the end of the day, education is not about jobs. It's not about school buses. It's not about school buildings. It's about children taking them point A to point B eventually and making them members of a global economy that can produce. So this is where the Digital Learning Council that I was proud to be a part of, I believe, plays an important role. And that is we have this enormous amount of technology out there and ways that we can deliver education that we've never seen before. And it is growing at a pace that you cannot even imagine the things that are available. Has anybody ever been to iTunes U? I mean, go on iTunes U to see all the lectures that you can see from around the world. You know what? I was out at Apple a couple years ago, and the number one lecturer in the world at that time was a Harvard professor teaching physics. Now, if somebody would have told me, you know, you'll spend the next hour watching a Harvard tech teacher do physics, I would say, no thanks. But this teacher was so good that not because people were forced to go watch him, but just simply the marketplace. Hundreds of thousands of people were linking to this site to watch this teacher teach a physics class. And why should any child, of course, be denied, not just that teacher, but any good teacher that can do that? But the idea is that we have all these resources out there, these amazing teachers, and we now are very close to having the ability to link children or students through using these resources, if we will just simply do so. So I want to hand something out. I have to apologize. Being a good fiscal conservative, I'm extremely frugal. And I underestimated the number of you who would be here today. I figured, why would someone want to hear me talk? So I only printed 50 of these. So please share. But these are this is the layout from our Digital Learning Council. And the way this came about, I'll be real quick with this, is Governor Bush, who I think is the leading education reformer in the United States from a government standpoint, and Governor Wise, Democrat and Republican, Governor Wise did a lot of great things in the state of West Virginia, came together and they said, look, we want to bring 100 of the best people we know from technology, from education, and from government, bring them together and create this list of things that we think are absolutely necessary for moving forward with digital learning. In other words, how do we bring this entire country together with this understanding that we are going to use technology as the greatest tool we have to help advance learning in ways we've never seen before. And they said, well, the first thing we've got to do is set up a kind of a list of standards or a list of ideals, and that's what you see in front of you. And I want to go through this quickly, and then I'll make one more little comment, and I'll open this up to questions. Number one, all students are digital learners. First of all, every student needs to have access to this, but if you think about your children today, and I would imagine this has to be universal through this room, all kids are learning in a digital manner right now. I mean, I don't know how many laptops we have at home, but it's got to be at least 6. And my kids are walking around with them all the time, not to mention iPhones and stuff like that. My oldest is only 11, all right, and I have 4. So that gives you an idea that they adapt to the digital learning environment at a very early age. And as an aside, when you think about digital learning, I think we were talking about Georgia Cyber Academy. Why we still teach, frankly, with textbooks is somewhat silly to me. I don't want to offend any, well, actually I do. If you're a textbook manufacturer or a salesperson, I do want to offend you in a certain way. Because what a textbook provides and what a digital learning platform provides is dramatically different. I mean, even if all you're looking at are hyperlinks. You know, if I'm reading through a textbook and I see a term that I don't understand or something that I don't really understand, I'm just kind of stuck with it unless I want to go get another book and look it up. Through a digital learning process, of course, I click on that hyperlink and I think, wow, a whole new world's opened up and now I understand this, and I don't proceed to the next idea until at least I've got somewhat of a grasp of what I was talking about. So all students are digital learners. As we look at public policy, we need to make sure that we have high quality digital content. And of course, these courses are online. And the handout has a lot more than what I'm going over here. I'm just going over the main bullet points. And I think this is the key one, and it's what I talked about a teacher walks into a classroom and they see 25 beautiful children in front of them, every one of them coming from a different place, every one of them probably going at a different pace. And how do you create a learning process for each one of those that's probably going to be slightly different? You cannot do that through a standard textbook and through a standard curriculum. You have to use digital platforms to be able to gauge where children are and where they are going to go on almost a daily or weekly basis. I want to throw a shout out in the term that people use now to Sprayberry High School. I went to Sprayberry about a year and a half ago, and they, in one of their math classes, they have this very cheap, inexpensive technology, I should say. It's not cheap. They put up on the board in math a problem, and all the kids have clickers. Now, growing up, the only clicker I knew of was when I was a teenager and we finally had a television you could actually point at and make it work. But all kids now understand what clickers are, so they hand out these clickers, and they put the question up on the board, and the teacher, the students answer it, they click the answer, and if everybody's mastered it, she goes on to the next one. If they don't master it, she stops what she's doing, teaches the topic, asks the question again, a different question, of course, and same basic topic. The kids click again. Once the kids in the classroom have mastered it, she goes on to the next topic. Now, I know we hear a lot about No Child Left Behind. That's No Child Left Behind right there. Not waiting until 6 weeks after the end of the year to get test results back and say, oh, I guess Johnny wasn't learning too well this year, was he? No, you need to know that Johnny's not learning that day, not 6 weeks after the school year's over, because by then, Johnny's gone, and you can't do anything about it. You need to know who's learning and who's not learning, and if the kids haven't mastered a certain topic, you can teach it right there on the spot. That is easy, it's inexpensive, and it can happen in our classrooms right now today. But that is what we talk about with personalized learning, because you can then drill down even further and say this particular child needs help here, and work with that particular child on that particular subject matter or that particular topic until they can get back up, caught up with the rest of the class. You cannot wait until the end of the year and then just move them along through the system as we typically do. This is one, number 4, students progress on demonstrated competency. I talked a moment ago about this crazy idea that we take kids based on their mailing address and put them all in the same school and we keep all the kids, all the 9-year-olds together. We have, for some strange reason, and it goes back to the model of preparing children for a factory, we measure education in time, but not competency. It ought to be the exact opposite. We should be measuring the competency, not the time. Once a child has mastered something, why on earth are they still sitting there in the same spot with everybody else? I'm not talking about physically moving, but I mean, they ought to be moving academically to the next subject. You know, there's a school in North Fulton, I apologize, I can't remember the name of it. An incredible school. And what this guy takes are kids that are borderline genius, and he puts them into an environment where they can thrive, because they're not going to get it in a system that says everybody's the same, we're going to keep everybody in the same spot. And he was telling me, he said, Chip, you know, almost half of the kids that are in my school were either dropping out or on the verge of dropping, had dropped out or on the verge of dropping out. And these are kids that are geniuses. Now, it's a small school. And the reason is because you have a lot of children who are very bright, who are not being challenged. And again, it's not the teacher's fault. How's the teacher going to take the kid that's a genius and the kid that has a mild learning disability and expect to teach them the same thing? That's extremely difficult. And I will fault no one for not being able to accomplish that. But those children at the high end, just like the children at the low end, have got to have something that's working for them, or they're going to get bored and they're going to drop out. And we pay an enormous price for that. When our very best and brightest are not finishing high school because they're bored, that is an indictment on all of us. So we've got to be able to let children move along once they've demonstrated competency. One of the things that I think is a somewhat of a misperception about digital learning is that what we're talking about is taking kids, locking them in a room and putting them in front of a computer and just saying, have at it, and we'll check on you in a little while. That's not it at all. This is taking our best teachers, putting them with children who can use the technology to advance, and the teacher can work with the children on an individual basis to figure out where they are and what help they need. It is a teacher as a mentor, as opposed to the teacher worrying about the person who always has to be providing the content. And that is, the content can be provided through the technology. It's the human interaction that is extremely important in moving those children, keeping them interested in education, and bringing them to the place we want them to be. And I'll give you one stat that proves this beyond a shadow of a doubt. I read this 4 years ago, and then I verified it just because I couldn't believe it the first time I read it. You take all the students across the United States, private, public, homeschool, and the average student is, of course, at 50%. And then you say, well, where are the homeschool students on these? This is math, science, and everything mixed together. Where does the average homeschool student on this scale of 0 to 100? They're at 80%. Our homeschool education system in this country is phenomenal. And then, here's what shocked me, and this will probably shock you as well, and I had to verify, but it's true. The results of learning for the homeschool children are absolutely no different dependent upon the parents' education. So the parents whose children, the parents who only had a high school diploma and the parents who had PhDs, their children were achieving no different. Now, why is that? Because, I mean, I just thought everybody would think, well, of course the PhD parents would be homeschooling their children far better than the high school graduates of the GED parents, but it's not happening. And what it is because when you have a teacher or a mentor working on almost a one-to-one basis with a particular child, and particularly in a scenario where that parent cares more about that child than anybody on earth, that child is going to learn. The limitations of the parent's education are somewhat irrelevant. It's the interaction between the teacher and the child on an individual basis that moves that child along at an amazing pace. And so, if you take nothing, well, I hope you take a lot from today's speech, but that's one of the things I want you to remember. We've got to have high-quality teachers. Every study that's ever been shown shows that the biggest impact on a student is having a high-quality teacher. That has to happen in a digital learning environment. That has to happen in a brick-and-mortar environment. That has to happen everywhere. All students have to have access to multiple high-quality providers. We need that in the state of Georgia. I love the Georgia Cyber Academy with all my heart. I truly do. We need a lot more of Georgia Cyber Academies of every form in this state. There's got to be accountability. We cannot say that a student not learning is acceptable any longer, and the way you do that is constant assessment. There's got to be funding. We are struggling with that today. I love our governor and those who are looking at this, but they're absolutely wrong if you think you can provide a true digital learning environment on a little over $3,000 a year. Nobody in the world can do that. It's ridiculous, and if that's what you expect, that's the results you're going to get. The adage about you get what you pay for, when it's not, we want to overspend, but we got to spend at least enough to provide a quality education. And by the way, it saves us no money when we lowball like that. I just want to make this point real clear. I don't know who's going to be watching this. But when you provide such low money that providers won't come into the state to offer their services, all that means are the students that would have gone there, they're still going to get an education, but they're going to go to the more expensive education system as opposed to the optimal education system. I mean, they're all going to be educated somehow. So instead of spending the $8,700 in an education facility that may not work for them, why not just spend the $5,000 or the $6,000 or the $7,000 to help them in the system that works for them? It's cheaper, but more importantly, it produces better results. And then finally, we have to have an infrastructure that supports digital learning. I think this goes without saying. So you have this. I'm going to leave this with you. But I want you to think about the world that most of us, and I'll close with this and then answer any questions. I want you to think about the world that most of us grew up in. When I grew up off of Burnt Hickory Road in Cobb County, Georgia, the choices that I had to go to school were very few. I first went to the Walker School when I was in first grade. It was a fantastic school that's still there. And then my father got a job working for Cobb County Public Schools. And so he thought that maybe he shouldn't send his kid to the Walker School anymore. So I went to Due West Elementary School, which, by the way, was and is to this day a fantastic school. Still one of the best in all of Cobb County. Very proud to say I graduated from there so many years ago. But that was really, if you lived in Cobb County, you may be able to go to Walker School, you may be able to go to private school or to public school, but there was no homeschool or anything else. Now I want you to think about the reality of the world we live in. We have public schools that I would call brick and mortar schools. You have virtual schools. You have hybrid public virtual schools where they go to school part of the day they're in a virtual learning environment. You have home schools. You have just your general private schools. You have homeschool / private school hybrids. We have that in Cherokee County with King's Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Fantastic place. I did the graduation speech last year. The top graduating students going to West Point, so that's and the other three right below him are all going to Georgia Tech. So they're certainly doing the job. And then you have what I hope to soon be a homeschool public school hybrid where children can learn at home on the subjects that their parents are comfortable with and can learn actually in a public brick and mortar setting for the topics that they're not comfortable with. I don't know why we would ever stop that, ban that, prevent that, or slow that down, but we need to get to that point. So you have all these different models that can be used. And wouldn't it be nice if every parent had a choice amongst all of them? I don't talk about education and put a word in front of it. I hear people say all the time, public education. Look, for my tax dollars, or my purposes as just a general citizen of the United States and citizen of Georgia, I want Johnny and Jenny down the street to get an education. And frankly, I don't care where they get that education, as long as they get that education. That's what I care about. Because I know when they get an education and are not incarcerated or not working a minimum wage job, it's going to help me at some point. So I want them, as a taxpayer, to get the best education possible. That setting is irrelevant to me. And the fundamental question I think we have to have when it comes to educational choices, at the end of the day, if we have all these options, who ought to make the decision on where that child is educated? Who knows best? And right now, there's two choices: government and parents. If we want to change the way we have education in this country today, and I hope after my opening remarks, we all agree it absolutely must change. We've got to do two things. We've got to provide educators, whether they're public, private, or parents, with the tools they need through digital learning. And then we have to give the parents the opportunity to choose that setting that is best for their individual child. Anything short of that, and 20 years from now, someone else is going to be standing here bemoaning where we are in education and wondering why we are no longer the world's superpower and why we owe 3 generations of wealth to the Chinese. No longer can we ignore students' abilities, their interests, by simply giving them one option, and that is a brick and mortar setting based upon what is on their mailbox number. That is foolish, has been for some time, and it's got to stop. And I'll close with this. John Adams said it many, many years ago. Why do we spend money on education? It's because an educated society is a lot cheaper than an uneducated society. So as all of us that sit here today, as both parents and taxpayers, we ought to demand that those resources that this nation invests, which are enormous, are invested in a manner that will generate the greatest educational results for us. And if they don't, we're going to fail. And anyone that advocates something other than that, here's my offensive part, is simply wrong. We must demand this, and I don't know how else to say this, but literally our future depends on it. Again, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 32nd reading among industrialized nations, $13.8 trillion in debt, mainly to foreign nations, who now, by the way, don't even want to use our currency anymore. We are in a whole world of trouble. And the only way we get out of it is to produce the next set of children who compete in the global marketplace and maintain American superiority. So with that, thank you for listening to my speech today. I know there were some bold words in there. If I offended you, I apologize to a certain degree, but I did hope to wake some people up as to the necessity of what we're going to have to engage in. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Senator Mike Klein from the Public Policy Foundation. Our Georgia Virtual School is budgeted to receive about $5.4 million this year out of a budget that's $7.4 billion at DOE. The Florida Virtual School will receive approximately $130 million, and that's also inside the Florida Department of Education. What are your thoughts on what should be the future of the Georgia Virtual School?
Well, let me first say the Florida Virtual School motto, I absolutely love this. I keep telling myself I got committed to memory, but I had to write it down again today. But this is their motto, and it's just perfect. Anytime, any place, any path, any pace. Isn't that what we ought to be telling our children? Anytime, any place, any path, any place. We want you to learn at 6 o'clock in the morning. We want you to learn at 10 o'clock at night. We want you to do it at the best pace possible for you. We want you to learn. I've said this so many times. If your belief that education is contained within the moment the child steps onto the school bus, the moment the child steps off the school bus, you're really, to a certain degree, telling your child that there's not a whole lot worth in what they're doing. But, you know, I don't really care that much about you because we have determined your education fits in these neatly placed little hours. That is not reality anymore, and we can't survive that way. So, that being said, to your question, Florida is leading the way. I would actually go much further than what Florida has done. They really have their school setting. For the most part, you go to school and then you spend some of your time in a virtual setting. I think that doesn't really live up to their motto of any place. But that being said, they are the leaders. We need to follow. If you have just looked at the educational results in Florida from 10 years ago to today, we could only dream of accomplishing what they're accomplishing. As far as the percentage of our budget that is being allocated to the purpose of providing virtual education, it is pitiful. The notion that we have a cap on the number of students that can be in the Georgia Cyber Academy, I just, for the life of me, I don't understand. If there is demand for these students and the parents of these students to say, I want to go this path, by the way, it's cheaper, much cheaper, but I want to go this path, why would we ever say no? I mean, the technology is there. I mean, it's not like they can't provide it. So it's all there. The state's far behind, and I will lead the charge and a wake-up call to get people to understand it without accepting the reality of the world we live in and moving in a dramatically different path. We are in serious trouble.
What do you think higher ed's responsibility is to K-12 to put it into this world? Because the teachers who are coming out of higher ed, do you think they're prepared to do the kind of things that you're talking about?
Well, one of the things I think we need to do is this idea that only those who have a teaching certificate can teach is, and Georgia's made some strides there, but I think we need to, I don't know that I'm going to put the emphasis on higher ed, because higher ed has a function, and in Georgia they're doing pretty well, better than K through 12. But I do believe we, as those who are concerned about K through 12, need to look at it through a different lens, and I'll take it back to my own experience in the mid-1980s when I went from being a junior in high school to a senior in high school. I'll never forget this. This is an honest, true story. In my junior year, it was the first year they ever introduced the Apple IIe computers into schools here in Georgia. Some of you may recall that. My teacher was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Diffendorfer, and of German descent, strangely enough. And he was one of the first people that I ever met in my life who was getting a PhD, and he was getting it at Georgia Tech, and I think it was in computer science. Anyway, this guy knew computers inside and out. He was teaching at our school, public high school in Georgia. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, we were learning things that I'm sure very few other kids in Georgia were learning. I got to the end of my junior year, and back then the law was that you had, I believe, a year to get your teaching certificate or you could no longer teach. Well, he wanted to keep teaching, but he was kind of busy with this whole thing called a PhD to actually be going and getting a teaching certificate. So the school said, too bad, you can no longer teach. Because I spoke to him personally, and they said, he told me I'm not allowed to teach anymore because I don't have my teaching certificate. In his place, for my senior year, was the wrestling coach, teaching the same class. Had never, this is the honest to God truth, had never turned on a computer. He was a wrestling coach. Great guy, meant a lot, but was light years behind where the rest of the class was when we were teaching him as opposed to him teaching us. That is I think the mindset we need to change, and that is that you have people, great people, all across this country, this state in particular, that are willing to teach. And they're willing to do it in a digital environment, they're willing to do it in a standard classroom setting, if we simply allow them to. Now, that doesn't mean we need to take anybody off the street and say, hey, you look kind of neat, come teach. There needs to be some minimal standards. But I think the idea that you have to have a certificate or meet certain rules and regulations when you've already displayed an enormous amount of competency in a given area, I think we're far too restrictive. So I think that is the direction I hope we will go.
Hey, Chip, to follow up on that question, as legislators, I think we failed because we've never gotten inside our university system to see how good a job our teaching colleges are doing preparing people to do the things that you'd like to do, never mind what they should have been doing up to this point in time. And to my knowledge, we've never really evaluated, because a lot of us have a gut call that a lot of the stuff that they're being taught perhaps is garbage and not relevant, and yet we, as legislators, to jump on your question there, because I think that's what he's really asking. All these things are wonderful, but you've got to have people qualified to do it. And if we're not teaching these kind of things in our teaching universities, then it's all a moot point, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I mean, there are a lot of people qualified to do it, but we do have to pay them. I mean, does anybody know the kind of background of Waiting for Superman, the movie? First of all, how many people have seen it? Wow, everybody needs to go see it. It's fantastic. The background of this is the guy had done he's a documentary filmmaker. He'd done a documentary 10 years ago on first-year teachers. And what he recognized is that, man, these first-year teachers are great. They bring so much energy. They have no experience, but they bring energy, and they really, this is their life's calling. And he thought how wonderful these teachers are in their first year. And his plan was to go back 10 years from there and check on them. Well, the 10 years went by, and he went back to check on them. He recognized that most of them aren't even there anymore. And the ones that are there have been chewed up by the system. So instead of making the documentary on these first-year teachers and where they were after 10 years, he said, wait a minute, I got to make a documentary on what the heck happened. Why are these teachers leaving? And that was really what the premise of the movie was about, is why are these great teachers being eaten up by this system? And part of the reason is, again, if you pay the worst teacher and the best teacher the same amount of money, eventually you're going to get both of them to say, who cares? There's some, again, great teachers out there that certainly aren't doing it for the money. But human nature tells you if you're not being rewarded for the things that you're doing that are good, eventually you're going to stop doing it. So we got to, number one, pay our teachers a whole lot more that are willing to deliver this. But if I can take two mediocre classroom teachers and pay them a combined, we'll say $100,000, or I can take, and they've got 25 students each, and I can take one great teacher, pay him or her $100,000 to educate those 50 children through a virtual learning setting, I've probably accomplished a whole lot right there. And that can happen. I mean, that can absolutely happen. But we have to have the will to make it happen. I'm going to say one last thing, and I'll take one more question, because I always have to say this. And it really gets back to what I started with. My first few words were the United States is the greatest nation on earth. And I want to tell you something that just bothers me on a personal standpoint. Because I've heard people say, that, well, you can have school choice, you just got to move to a district where they got good schools. Come on, all right? I, as an American, find it somewhat offensive that the child of a parent that lives in the Walton High School District and the child of a parent who lives in Southwest Atlanta don't get the same education. And we as Americans should demand better than that. We're not guaranteeing anybody results. But for children, we ought to give them all the same opportunity regardless of their parents. And it's a bit embarrassing to me that you have to spend $400,000 to move into certain school districts. But you can only do that if you have the $400,000. But if you're the single mom of 2 kids stuck in a bad school system, you got no choice. You've got literally no chance. And as a nation, we got to be better than that. And this is the civil rights issue of our time. To the African American children that are trapped in failing schools or with teachers who cheat them out of their future, we got to demand a whole lot better. And when they're not getting what they deserve, we got to give them a different opportunity. And I just say that as just one American to another. We live in a country that's better than what we have right now. And when we see injustices like that, we've got to demand action. And I'll take one last question.
Georgia's winning application to Race to the Top, are there parts in that application and the implementation of that that will help fulfill some of the things that you've brought forward to us today?
I try not to answer questions in a roundabout way when I'm just kind of don't know the answer and I don't. So I can't tell you the answer to that. But let me just say this. I will say I'm obviously not an enormous fan of the president, but you know, I like to judge people on where they are on different issues. And on the issue of education, I want to give President Obama kudos because I think he's doing more than we had in the last administration. And I appreciate that. And while he's not as far along the spectrum towards educational choice as I would like him to be, he is demanding a different view of education, and his Secretary of Education, Artie Duncan, I think, is doing a really good job. So I will hand out credit where I think credit is due, and in that particular case, he may be wrong on every other issue, but on education, I think the President is actually doing a pretty good job, better than we've had. Now we got to jump light years ahead. But we've got to give people credit where they're doing good work. And I think Race to the Top and some other things is his effort to try to say that, I'll close, I promise I'll close with this, I promise. He has this goal of, you know, what was it, 15, 20 years ago, the United States led the world in college graduates. Now I think we're 7th. His goal is that by 2020, we will be #1 again. That is an amazing goal, and I am with him 1,000,000%. You know, when we had a goal of defeating the evil Axis in World War II, when we had a goal of putting a man on the moon, we accomplished it when we thought we never could. We can accomplish this. This, in fact, of having the most graduates is probably not quite as difficult. But for goodness sakes, we ought to at least set that as our goal and do everything in our power. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, black, white, doesn't matter to me. Everybody ought to agree that let's get the United States back on top when it comes to producing people that are going to compete in the worldwide economy. With that, thank you for taking an hour out of your day to listen to a politician speak. It's amazing sometimes people actually listen to me, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator Rogers. 3 comments. We do have a paper out back that I think one of by Sergeant George, who specifically talks about how we can use Race to the Top to get to hybrid schools in Georgia. So I encourage you to pick that up. Second, $13 trillion doesn't count Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare unfunded liabilities that get you to nearly $100 trillion, so don't hate to depress you. And our women's athletic teams at Georgia Tech are having a great year. Thank you all for coming. Look forward. Leave the business cards so we can inform you about our exciting events for next year, and have a great rest of 2010.